My second outright play, Spencer, go with the guy who played great golf last week, good enough to go win a golf tournament. Camilo Villegas wound up in a share of second place in Cabo last week. He's 100 to 1 this week. I expected, based on some recency bias, that number to be a lot shorter. 5% of the portfolio on Villegas. He's shown in the past, Spencer, that when he gets hot, he can often stay hot. And so that's a guy that played some great golf last week, and we'll see if he can do it again. Really? Really, guys? Is that how we're going to start the show? No pressure or anything. On the final show, the Gimme, presented by Bet365, the final show of the 2023 calendar year. Yeah, no pressure. No, like, ease our way into the holidays. No, hey, yeah, you went 1-2 last week with the outright picks. I don't know if that means play me or fade me this week, but you probably want to fade in any case. What's going on, everybody? I'm Jason Sobel. He is Spencer Aguiar, of course. And yes, that's right. The 54th and final PGA Tour event of this super season this week at Sea Island, Georgia, the RSM Classic. And yeah, that's right. It's late, but it's never too late to make some money. We're going to help you do that in just a little bit, giving you our favorite outrights, props, matchups. And oh, by the way, special little interesting thing. We're getting into the DP World Tour Championship this week as well. So we're getting off just the PGA Tour and getting onto that one as well. Before we go anywhere, though, gotta tell you, the Gimme is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. That's why you get more boosts with them than with anyone else. Every day, they power up the odds on hundreds of bets to give you a chance to win more. Bet365 boosts specific markets, your winnings, and even parlays, and they don't stop there. Keep an eye out for their biggest and best odds with the incredible Super Boost. Check out the boost and see why. It's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 or older only, or 18 or over in Kentucky and present in Colorado, Iowa, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, and Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER in Colorado, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, or Virginia, or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms, conditions, and restrictions, as always, they apply. Let's get to the top of the board this week, Spencer, at Bet365. I'm telling you, get used to it, guys. The favorite this week is going to be the favorite in a lot of events over the next, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years. Ludwig Aubert, the Phenom, at 12 to 1 this week. Russell Henley has moved a lot. Russell Henley opened at, I believe, 25 to 1. He's at 14 to 1. There may be a correlation between Spencer's first outright play and the reason why Henley has gotten so short. I'll tell you about that in a second. Cameron Young, Brian Harman, Corey Connors all at 22 to 1. JT posted at 28 to 1. Let's get to the portfolio. As always, we've got $100 to bet this week. We're going to start with 3 outrights this week because first round leader plays, not in the books yet. They should be there soon. They're going to be split up between the Plantation course and the Seaside course. I'll tell you all about that in a few minutes. But in any case, we're going to make 3 outrights just because, I don't know, did pretty well last week. Might as well try to hit some more for you. So, Spencer, why don't you start off with yours? And like I said, is there a reason why Russell Henley's number has moved the way it has the last couple of days?
I mean, I always like to think that I have something to do with that. And, it's funny, Jason, because I did Sirius Radio with you a couple weeks ago, and you asked me a question at the end of the show to name one player who I thought was in for a really big next season, somebody to keep in mind as we move forward. Like, obviously, there are many quality options that we could have discussed. Some are going to have more upside than others when we start talking about major championship contests and things of that nature. However, the pick I gave there was Russell Henley, and it's going to be the pick that I'm going to start off this show with. I did grab him at 24 to 1 for $14 of my budget. That was a Bet365 price for most of Monday inside the enhanced market. You kind of touched on it best. Like, obviously, numbers move in sports betting as books get wagers that enter the space. There's always an option to pivot when someone drops over 33% in price over 24 hours. You mentioned this. We saw Henley do that. I still think if you shop around, you can find him in that 16 to 1 range at a couple books out there, but this is more of that 14 to 1 at most of the shops that you're looking at. I will say that I believe the movement in price makes a ton of sense when you consider that my model did grade him as the perceived second favorite behind Aubert on Monday morning when I initially built my sheet. It's interesting now that we're in a position to where he is the co-favorite at a lot of these books. I think there's a real reason behind that. We talked about this probably, what would that be, a month or a month and a half ago, when I actually made the pitch for him to be on the Ryder Cup team, because I thought that these club down tests that are going to reward accuracy, quality, proximity play, thought that's a big boost for him. That's obviously an argument that we'll never know the correct answer to with how things transpired that weekend, but it's one of those situations where I'm not sure if the market has necessarily corrected itself for a player that I deem to be a top 20 talent on tour. We saw the correction obviously take place from Monday to Tuesday. I'm curious to see what ends up happening moving forward if for some reason Henley does not perform this week. Like, this is his first event of the fall. I wish we would have seen a little bit more from him to have to pay this movement now at this point. But if you made me give one answer of who's going to win this event, I'm going to say Russell Henley. So I'm going to keep him for this show. I still think he's a fine wager in that 16 to 1-ish range, but obviously a lot of the value has been suppressed out of the number.
Yeah, obviously there, and we see that, a lot of people are jumping on Russell Henley. We have our NFL team at the Action Network does these luck rankings every week, and I've actually talked to some of our colleagues who have talked about doing luck rankings for golf moving forward without doing all the statistical analysis. And I'm not even sure I'm qualified to do that myself. I've always thought that Russell Henley would come out to be like at the top or very near the top, Spencer, of any sort of golf luck rankings, meaning essentially like the performance has outclassed the results. And I talk about that on a pretty regular basis, very much like the baseball pitcher who's 5-9 with a 173 ERA in the middle of the season. You're like, he's pitching really well. He just hasn't won games. At some point, there's going to be some positive regression. So I often think that about Russell Henley. Not the results have been poor necessarily, but just he's played well enough to win more often, contend more often than he has. So I do think that that's a nice play for this week. For my first outright, there was one name that jumped off the page as soon as I clicked on the odds, and I was hoping he wasn't too short this week. JT Poston has sort of quietly played the best golf of his life over the last 4 months. He's got 5 top 7 finishes in his last 8 starts. 7 of those 8 have been inside the top 25. The only one that wasn't was the Open Championship, which of course is a different animal, sort of an outlier from what we see on the PGA Tour on a regular basis. But it's not just the results. He's actually playing really well. So 7 of those last 8, in fact, each of the last 7, he's gained strokes with his irons. All 8 of those events over the last 4 months, he's gained strokes with his putter. You take a combo of really good iron play, really good putting. That's perfect for these golf courses at Sea Island. I know that JT doesn't have a great record. He's missed the cut in 4 of 6 starts, but the other 2 have been top 25 finishes in 2 of the last 4 years. I'm banking on JT Poston playing some great golf this week. He is my favorite play on the board, much like you said. If you just get one pick for a guy who you think is going to win, you go Henley. I'm going Poston.
I think it makes a lot of sense with Poston. Like, when the board originally opened, I had 4 or 5 values on my board. Billy Horschel, this would be compared to the outright price. JT Poston, obviously the Russell Henley play that I talked about. I think there's a lot to like about Poston. You mentioned that this has been quite a turnaround for him recently with the performances that he has put together. I think in the outright market also, like some of those miscuts that he's provided here, I'm always willing to throw that out the window when I am trying to shoot for upside in a market. And I certainly think Poston has that here. It was an interesting price. It was one of those situations, Jason, to where when I thought books open the pricing, like obviously Aubert being the favorite makes a lot of sense. I thought there were some weird divergences in the pricing compared to where I would have had it. Like, you could make a sound argument that Poston probably should have been a sub, I don't know, 25, 28 to 1 choice in this field. So it definitely felt like a number that was slightly too high.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way on Brian Harman, who's actually corrected the market just a little bit, but having Cameron Young open as a shorter number than Brian Harman, I thought was a little strange too, on a course that seems tailor-made for a guy who lives in the area. Let's get to your second outright. Where are you going with that one?
Yeah, I think this is another player very similar to what I discussed with Russell Henley here. Brendan Todd, 55 to 1 for $6. And I think sometimes we get into a spot with Todd where books discredit his win equity when the market opens. We probably got some of that here with the inflated 55 to 1 price that has now dropped more into that 40 to 45 to 1 zone at the time of us recording this zone or this show right now. But my math thought that Todd was the number one player in this field when combining accuracy, proximity, and putting. Can't really think of too many courses that are more tailor-made for him than this venue will be. It also shouldn't hurt that it located him first for recalculated par 4 production between 400 to 460 yards. That's a range that will see 10 stops daily at Sea Island. To me, if we did nothing more than we took away Todd's name here, you blurt out his name and you ran the numbers here and solely focus on the stats, I think he's a sub 40 to 1 golfer in this field that can really excel at a venue like this where he's going to be able to find fairways. He has the ability to spike with his irons. And I mean, he's one of the best putters on tour when he puts it together. So it's a really interesting spot to where I think we've seen this the past couple of weeks where the market boosted him way up to where he was sub 20 to 1 to win a lot of these events. I know it's a much stronger field this week that we're talking about, but he's one of the only names of that group of players that actually got doubled or tripled in price compared to those numbers. So I think this is one of those nice spots to where you get this inflation in price. He has not been bad. He maybe hasn't been as good as everybody wants, but I think this is a very nice spot for Todd to potentially win.
I'm glad you got into that. I've actually got my notes sitting here still from last week's show that you and I did together where Brendan Todd opened at 16 to 1. He was the second favorite in the field in Bermuda by the time they teed off on Thursday morning. A couple other guys, Patia and Noren, might have caught him and been right there with him at 16 to 1. But still, he was 16 to 1. He was 16 to 1 for a reason because he had finished top 7 in 3 of his previous 6 starts. I get it, a better field this week. But it's not like he played badly last week. Actually started really hot, had a so-so over par round on Saturday, and then played pretty well on Sunday, finished in 20th place, and all of a sudden he's got a number that's 3.5 times longer this week. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I would have probably taken him outright this week, Spencer, except I've got a bet on Brendan Todd later in the show that I like even better, so I was going to save his name for that one. All right, my second outright play. Struggled with this one a little bit. I think just from all the pressure, there's a lot of weight on my shoulder after my second outright came through at 100 to 1 last week in Camilo Villegas. Guys, I don't know if it's going to happen every week, but I really do like Alex Smalley on a shorter course in the Southeast with Bermuda greens, kind of right up his alley. He was tied for 5th place here a year ago. 45 to 1. Isn't a number I love. He opened at 60 to 1. If you got in early, congratulations, but I still don't mind getting after this number. Again, I'm just looking at a player who wouldn't surprise me if he goes out and wins at the end of the season here. And Alex Smalley's a guy that's got the talent to do it. I don't think it would surprise anybody. He's a guy that's playing essentially to get into some of those signature events next year because he's got his card. He's all set for 2024. So he's got some weight lifted from his shoulders, even if I don't. So that's my second outright. And again, we're doing 3 this week, Spence.
Yeah, my third one is going to be Zach Blair 200 to 1. It's for $1. This was actually one of the first wagers I grabbed at 300 to 1 when the books opened on Monday. I even saw it as high as 325 to 1 on Bet365 inside of their enhanced market before everything came crashing down for him. I think if you can find some extra spare change in the couch, I wouldn't mind doing this for a little bit more than $1. Personally, on my card, I bet to win 15 units. To put this into comparison, I normally bet to win 7 on my outrights. I know that's a completely different conversation than what we're doing on this show right now, but there's a lot to like about him from an upside perspective. Like, I'll talk about this a little later. I decided to put him into 2 sections here because we did end up adding the third outright late to our cards, but I thought this was one of the better dart throws I've seen in some time because of Blair's high upside metrics inside my model. There's going to be that obvious risk that you would expect for a golfer that typically lacks distance, but the layout of the land here helped to propel him to be the highest climber for me in value because of his accuracy, weighted proximity, and putting acumen. You might still be able to find better than 200 to 1 if you shop around, but I will say, Jason, the most amazing thing about this play is from the opening of 325 to 1, I've seen it sub 100 to 1 at some books. Like, the movement is credible here. I guess if I'm just going to be taking credit for everything right now, I'll take credit for the Henley movement. I'll take credit for the Blair movement. I'll take credit for the Todd movement, but those have been 3 of the bigger movers. Obviously it's tough to come on shows and talk when things have moved as steeply as they have. But I think, as I keep saying, there's real reason behind that movement.
So I think recency bias is going to have a lot of people looking for the lottery tickets this week, just based
Sure.
on the fact that Eric Van Rooyen had a decent number around 60-1 next to his name 2 weeks ago. Camilo was triple digits last week. And I think everyone goes, ooh, I don't want one of those. I want to hit one of those tickets. That said, there's some history behind it too. Each of the last 6 winners of the RSM Classic has been 40-1 or longer, and 3 of those 6 going from Tyler Duncan to Robert Streb, and I believe Adam Svensson last year as well, were over 100-1. And so, look, you said well, it happened last week. It happened last year. It happened a couple times before that at this event. There's some reason to look for a triple digit ticket. I don't mind the likes of, Kramer Hickok, who's played really nicely the last couple of weeks. Robbie Shelton, who should fit this golf course. Grayson Murray, who's a total wild card. Well, I wouldn't play anywhere else except for an outright because I think he's got that ceiling. I don't necessarily know where that floor could be, but when he plays well, he plays as well as anybody. I am, though, going to go with my triple digit play, my last outright. This guy who was number 1 on the Korn Ferry Tour money list and points list this past year. I know we love looking for the Korn Ferry grads, Spencer, for guys who are first-time PGA Tour players, guys who are just getting their feet wet on the Korn Ferry. They graduate, and it's like, all right, what do they have? Sometimes it's better to look at guys who have been there, done that, who aren't going to be too worried and feel too much pressure in the spotlight of playing alongside the game's best players. Ben Coles was a pretty good PGA Tour player for a few years when he was in the big leagues. Went back down to the Korn Ferry Tour after he lost his card, won twice early in the year, and at the end of the season, he was top 10 in 4 of his last 5 starts. A guy who should fit this golf course. He's an accuracy guy, an iron player, a good putter, a guy that's not going to necessarily bomb it out there every week, but he's guy that fits this golf course at 110-1. I'll throw $5 in my portfolio on Ben Coles this week. Talking about these golf courses at Sea Island in Georgia. We've got the Seaside and the Plantation. We'll split them up. Everybody plays one over the first 2 days, and then everyone's on the Seaside course, just over 7,000 yards for the entire weekend. I spoke with Davis Love III, the tournament host, just a couple of hours ago. I asked him how the course is playing. He's like, it's good right now. It's going to get wetter, though, so expect maybe distance actually help out a little bit more this week than usual because they are expecting some rain in the forecast over the first 2 rounds. Let's get to the player finishing position market at Bet365. We're going to buy one, and yes, that's right, we are going to sell one this week. Spencer, who are you buying?
I'm going to buy Billy Horschel, 46 or better, minus 120 for $10. Thought there were a handful of players. And, Jason, I wanted to cheat. I wanted to do 2 buys this week. And I found a unique way to get around it where I did give a sell. And then I'm going to get a more, a second stance of how I'm going to really approach that sell there. But it's been a disappointing season for Horschel. Found himself without a finish better than 40th place between April and mid-July. That obviously isn't ideal for a safety market like this on Bet365, but there's been a noticeable shift in the outputs for him over the past 6 starts. Horschel hasn't posted anything worse than a 45th place finish at the Irish Open during this run, which includes 5 top 20 performances. My model picked up on a 50-spot improvement in recent off the tee play. Think that could be leading the charge for him a little bit. And then he also ranks 2nd in this field when putting on similar green complexes in the past. I've always noticed an uptick in consistency when you give him some of these shorter venues. I thought this was a nice way to get exposure to him since he did place inside the top 10 of my model from an overall perspective. He's one of those names, and I think you kind of mentioned this best at the beginning when we were talking about outrights. There's a lot of ways to consider a card this week. I do think that a lot of people are taking the route of trying to hit a long shot of their own. And I think it's most likely that one of these players in that sub 40-1 range ends up winning it. It doesn't mean that you can't grab a name or 2 that you think has value, but I wanted to find a way to get exposure to Horschel. I didn't really know where to put it. I thought this Bet365 market was the best way to do it because he did have the safety inside of my model and the overall perspective that both ranked him inside the top 10.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It feels like universally the markets are pricing Billy Horschel as if he never played the DP World Tour events over the last couple of months, and it never even happened. And so he is playing well. Just because he hasn't played PGA Tour events doesn't mean he's not playing well. I told you I had to buy on Brendan Todd, and here it is. 50th or better at Bet365. Spencer, 50th or better. He's done that in his last seven events, and now he's playing a golf course that suits him better than any of those. I have not seen a play that I liked as much as this one in this marketplace in a long time, but I usually don't say this. I'm usually like, kind of like this play. Maybe it'll work. This one, I'm like, absolutely smash Brendan Todd 50th or better. I don't know what to say about it other than I think it's mispriced. I think you should be like 30th or better, but 50th or better is an absolute great number. Minus 120 as all these bets are, but boy, does this feel like a great way to increase your bankroll this week.
I know the market's moved a little bit. That's obviously the problem that we run into in this position, but I completely agree with you. I think the last I saw it might have been 45th or better, 46th or better, somewhere in that range. I agree with you 100%. This is a number that feels like it should be 33 and a half, somewhere in that range or better there. Like, I think he's a legitimate top 5 favorite in this tournament. So when he's not priced in that fashion and he's pushed outside of this top 40 zone, tons of value in that play. I think this is one of the best course fits that Brendan Todd is going to get all year. And the metrics really show that with just the high-end outputs that I have across the board for him.
As always, selling is tough. And selling is especially tough during the full portion of the schedule when no one looks like a sell on the board. Who are you selling this week?
I mean, I think I sell the same person every single time I do a show with you, and I don't think it's worked one time yet. And I'm a stubborn person that I find value on something and I keep rolling with it over and over again, even as the results keep losing. I'm only going to do this for $1. I will talk about it later of a different way that I think you can actually maybe get even better exposure against him. But I'm going to say Luke List 48th or worse. I can't help but feel like List loses his biggest weapon at a course like this. I know the recent results have been robust during these outings. It almost feels like a trap when you look at this 48th or worse number. He's been inside of that 7 of 8 starts, but my model keeps pointing these horrible trends of expectation because of 1, the removal of the driver that I talked about, and then 2, the 6.2% decrease that he's going to experience in proximity from outside of 175 yards. That kind of goes back to the same answer that I talked about, that 10 of these par 4s measure between 400 to 460 yards. You get that same expectation ask over and over and over again. That just means that proximity between 100 to 175 yards is going to be more pronounced than normal. I'll talk about it a little bit deeper when we get into a head-to-head play that I'm going to take him on with. It's going to be an interesting route there because I know I'm backing a player, you're fading the player, but we'll get into that in a second.
All right, so I've got a different name, same strategy for my sell, and you talk about Luke List and essentially negating his biggest advantage, which is the driver off the tee. And I'm going with Cam Young here, where, look, Cam Young is a guy that smashes it off the tee, one of the best drivers of the golf ball in the world. He's going to use driver a whole lot on these golf courses. And so for a guy who's finished outside the top 24 in 10 of his last 13 starts, just hasn't been great for him. He's good enough, has enough talent that he can play well and contend on any given week in any place. We've seen that over the last 2 years, but it's just not happening recently for Cam Young. I think more so than just about any other top player in the world. He looks like a guy that could just use a reset and could just go like, let me get back home. Let me work on some things. Let me get away from it. And let's start back anew in January. So I would not be surprised if with some new clubs in the bag right now, he's just kind of looking to get some reps in and take a couple of steps forward before he gets to next January's schedule. So fading him. Let's take a look at some props this week. Where are you going with yours?
I'm going to go for the home run on this long shot bet. Zach Blair plus 850 for a top 20, $23 of the bankroll. I realize the overall lack of safety could be on full display, but Blair was one of only 11 players to rank inside the top 27 when looking into expected putting on similar green complexes, recalculated strokes gained total to mimic this venue, and then anticipated scoring, which is a secondary thing towards this venue. The biggest takeaway there is that all the other players of those 11 who qualified on that list outside of Sam Ryder landed inside 60-1 on the slate. So you're really just looking at the favorites there. I'm not going to guarantee that Blair pops because of the potential volatility that I keep mentioning. Like, missing the cut is well within his range of outcomes. I just think there's a nice edge to be had here for really any placement market you want to talk about. That would include a top 40 at plus 200. Obviously, I went the more volatile route of the outright between 200 to 300 to 1. But for the sake of this show, I sort of like the middle at that plus 850 number for a top 20, since it gave us a little bit more wiggle room for him to find success while not winning. Plus, it didn't take into account some of the needed safety for a top 40. As I said, I'm fine with any of the routes that we've discussed so far, but Blair is going to be that option for me this week. He's one of my favorite long shot values on the board that I've had in some time. This is not too dissimilar. It's not quite as high end of a number as we were talking about here from what he got into my model, but very similar output. I had Adam Svensson last year at this tournament at 160 to 1. Svensson got inside the top 10 in some of those upside categories. Blair doesn't quite get that high. The safety numbers are much lower, but I think in these boom or bust markets, the further you work Blair up the board, it's at least worth taking a chance on it, because let's say hypothetically that he misses the cut. It's such a low risk, high upside thing. Like I could put the top 40, the top 20 in the outright and be in for this for less than a unit in reality. Like it's a head-to-head wager if it ends up failing. And if for some reason the pieces get put together, it's one of the biggest wins, that I've put together in golf. So I'm going to bet up on that upside with him, hope that he puts it together, but there is volatility. I just want to caution everybody out there who's listening.
Well, I love how your prop complements my prop really nicely, because yours is volatile. Mine's a much safer pick. We've actually sort of switched roles a little bit. I usually go with the more aggressive play, but I'm going to go with a top 20 this week on Steven Yeager. I feel like Steven Yeager is the kind of guy that's filled that role that Charles Howell III once had, that for a couple of years Matt McNeely was, which he's not going to necessarily pop on a leaderboard very often, but if you're looking for a top 20 play on a consistent basis, here's your guy who just doesn't take a week off and doesn't ever play bad golf. Yeager's actually missed the top 20 in his last 3 starts, but he's hit top 20 tickets in 4 of his last 9. So I'm going to play him at plus 210. I think that's a number that makes a whole lot of sense based on his recent history. Again, another guy who should be suited well by this golf course. I'm going to throw 20% of the portfolio on him. And now this is what I've been waiting for, because you and I are looking at a couple of different players in matchups here, where you're playing one, I'm fading one. It's the same guy.
I think it'll make maybe more sense when I explain it, because it's not so much a play on this player as it is the fade against Luke List. But Keith Mitchell plus 105 over Luke List for $45. Like, obviously, I talked about this being my preferred way of fading List earlier. It's one of the reasons I allocated nearly half my budget towards this play versus splitting the difference between the finishing position and the matchup portions of this bet. I did run my model in a more recent fashion to see how it would help the data for List. It still had the same issues with the inaccuracy off the tee and the reduction from not being able to experience as many long iron shots into these greens. I think that's a problem here. I always talk about how my matchups are more about who I want to take on versus who I'm trying to back. I think that's probably on full display here when looking at Keith Mitchell. I don't have a problem with Mitchell. I'm probably higher on him than you are, Jason, but believed he was fair market value with how he was priced. But I would have had this closer to minus 140 because of this massive downside traits that are surrounding List. Thought any plus number that we could get on him was a market error because of the recent production. Think if List performs better than expected, I still trust Mitchell enough to where I think the 4 consecutive top 44 finishes at this venue could come into play. And then if the downside ends up entering the mix here, it could turn into one of those short weekends for List that we have not seen from him recently. Said that a lot recently on shows. List continues to perform. I think this is the first time in any tournament that there was like the massive red flags of caution that popped up. He was usually just an overrated commodity. This is the first time that he plummeted outside of the top 70 for me in this tournament, just with the way that this course is set up. But as I said, more of a play against List as it is for a play on Mitchell. I'm curious to hear your alternative here with your matchup that you're taking, but that's kind of my stance with it.
Yeah, I can't get there. Keith Mitchell has stabbed me in the heart too many times this year. Look, I love the guy. He's one of my favorite guys to speak with on the PGA Tour. I think he's really good. I was as bullish on him coming into 2023 as I was on anybody, and it just never quite happened. I don't quite understand it either. For a guy who hits driver as well as he does for the first 4, 5, 6 months of the year, Keith Mitchell was like so much better than everybody else. Strokes gained driving, total driving numbers. Then you're looking at it, you're like, how is he not contending for titles? And it just wasn't quite happening for him. I'm still going to be bullish going forward to 2024, but I'm going to fade him this week because I don't think these golf courses, much like we talked about Cam Young, much like we talked about Luke List, you take away the biggest advantage for a player when you negate it with a shorter golf course. And I'll take a guy whose biggest weapon is on the greens. We all know Denny McCarthy is one of the best putters in the world. Give me Denny McCarthy over Keith Mitchell at minus 110. Denny McCarthy has 2 top 10s in 6 career starts at this event. But as I often say about him, I feel like every time I mention his name, he's played better golf than he has in the past. He just keeps incrementally and gradually getting better and better as he continues on this PGA Tour journey. He's going to win something sooner rather than later. He almost got it done at the Memorial Tournament and then fell into a playoff with Victor Hovland and lost that one. But I do like McCarthy. So based on what we've just said over the last couple of minutes here, McCarthy over Mitchell, Mitchell over List. I looked it up here. Based on the transitive property of order, Spencer, I had to look up some old math problems. That means you would go McCarthy over List as well. If A is greater than B, if B is greater than C, then A must be greater than C. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, I mean, I'll say this. If McCarthy versus List would have been one of the options, I actually think that that's probably the correct order to put them in, would be McCarthy first there, Mitchell second, List third. So, I mean, obviously everybody has access to different plays. To me, it's more of a fade against List. If you can find McCarthy against an option like List, I'd be all in on that also.
All right, I got to peel the curtain back a little bit because our gimme prop this week, let me just tell you, the last show of the year, if you're still sticking with us, if you've been watching every show, you deserve to know how, how the whole thing is made here. So I was asked for, hey, what do you think for a gimme prop this week? And said, well, there's a few big names out here. I go, I like Corey Connors a lot this week. Why don't we make the gimme prop Corey Connors top 10? And I was told, okay, sounds good. They're going to boost it to plus 300 for us, 3-1 for Corey Connors top 10. Then I get to come on the show and go, good idea. Corey Connors top 10. I'm all in. Spencer, what do you think?
Corey Connors, for me, I've always had a soft spot for him. I hit him at the Valero a couple years ago at 250-1. He's always one of these players when you put him on a ball striking course, which I think there are some ball striking properties to Sea Island here, to where, for me, he grades as a top 5 expected safety play. So he's one of the 5 safest players in the league. I never have a problem with Corey Connors. I always think he's an intriguing option. He's been very similar to, for me, historically, as a Russell Henley, to where I think the metrics are a little bit better than the performances have been. So I'll never say no to Corey Connors.
I'm so glad you mentioned Russell Henley here, because I was just about to say, as you said early in the show, you think Russell Henley is due for some long-term adjustments where he's going to have a big 2024. I feel the exact same way, not just about Henley, but Corey Connors. I think he's in for a big year. I'd be very surprised if 1 year from today, we're sitting here doing the show and we say, what's the biggest win of Corey Connors' career? And we go, well, he won the Valero Texas Open twice. It's going to be something bigger than that. I don't know if it's going to be a major. There's going to be a whole lot of signature events with smaller fields and a chance for other guys to get a piece of the pie. I would not be surprised if we see Corey Connors win. I don't know what it is, an API or Memorial Tournament or something that's kind of just below the major championships, but a nice little pedestal win, moving him up a little bit. Could happen this week as well. So we'll see. Top 10 for Connors, boosted again at Bet365 to plus 300. As mentioned off the top of the show, the RSM Classic, not even the biggest event in the world this week in men's golf, the DP World Tour Championship. Now, I've got a funny feeling Rory McIlroy is going to win the season-long title. That's because he already did. He's clinched it. That's probably another conversation for another time as to why and how a player can clinch a season-long title before the season's even up. That said, they're still playing a tournament this week in Dubai at Jumeirah, 7,700 yards. The last 11 winners of this event either were major champions or have since become major champions. So this is not really a spot where you like to play some long shots. Looking at the Bet365 board, Rory is at plus 450, Victor Hovland plus 500. Interesting that Victor is ahead now of John Rahm, who's plus 550. That's what you want to do. Give Rahm some refrigerator material there. Tyrrell Hatton at plus 1,200. Same for Matty Fitz, and then Tommy Fleetwood at 14-1. Who are you going with here, Spencer?
I think the size of the course that you mentioned is really the indicator there why you get all these favorites and these major championship winners that get across the finish line. I have some problems with the DP World Tour players because of the lack of data that I have inside my sheet. It's about 18 to 20 players that even showed up with any real win equity inside of my model when I ran it. I think one of those 18 players is who ends up winning this golf tournament. I think it gets really watered down at the bottom. I'm going to give the boring answer here. I'm going to say Rory McIlroy wins at plus 450. Wanted to kind of go with Tommy Fleetwood as the 15-1 sort of choice to be different, but I don't know. I hear 7,700 yards and I think about Rory's driver. So I'll go with Rory as the boring choice.
Yeah, I will take a guy with a lot of offensive firepower as well. And like I mentioned, it's been all major champions over the last decade plus. This guy's not a major champ yet, but give it time. The next 3-4 years, Minwoo Lee is coming. I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Corey Connors, one of my favorite long-term plays over the next 12 months. Minwoo Lee is right up there as well. I'm telling you, this kid's got some game. He's got some firepower. He's got some moxie. He is not afraid to play against the best players in the world. 18-1 this week. I'll throw 15% of the portfolio on him. I liked him at the Zozo Championship a few weeks ago. Finished in sixth place there. That's one of his 4 top 15 finishes in his last 5 starts. If you want to go a little bit deeper, Nikolai Højgaard playing some really good golf. Talk about tee to green offensive firepower. He's got it all as well. Sort of like a mini Ludwig Aubert there, although Nikolai is even older than him, I think. They're just about the same age. So recapping our portfolios this week, Spencer has Russell Henley, Brendan Todd, and Zach Blair outrights, buying Billy Horschel, selling Luke List, drop on Blair, matchup on Keith Mitchell, and Rory McIlroy over on the DP. I'm going with Hostin, Smalley, and Ben Coles as my outrights, buying Brendan Todd, selling Cam Young, prop on Steven Yeager, matchup on Denny McCarthy, and I'll go with Minwoo Lee over in Dubai. Guys, it's been an unbelievable year here at the Gimme. We thank you so much. Seriously, cannot thank you guys enough for watching every single week during the PGA Tour season. We'll be back. We'll be back in January for more of the Gimme presented by Bet365. Remember, for all of our content, go to Action Network, the Action Network app, this week and every other week during the entire PGA Tour season. For Spencer Aguiar, I'm Jason Sobel. Our thanks to Josh Golden, to Barbara Alberts, to Bridie Rubino, and everyone behind the scenes for a great job throughout the entire year. Good luck with your bets for the RSM Classic this week. Here's hoping you guys hit the green.